Welcome, everyone. Hello. We are admitting people in the meeting room. Okay. Hello, so my name is Claudia Zini, for those who don't know me. I'm the director at Kuma International here in Sarajevo. And we are not waiting for Alessandra and Abed from YALLA project to join us in order to start with the lecture with our next guest. They're going to join us a little bit later. So they asked me to introduce our next speaker. As you know, we already had 2 online lectures that are part of this workshop that we've been running together with the YALLA project about migration, making the history of architecture. We had 2 lectures already last week with Professor Dawn Chatty at Oxford University and one with Dr. Isa Bloomy at Stockholm University. It was really great to have them with us. And today we are really happy to welcome our 3rd guest, Yiad Issa, from the Department of Architecture at Birzeit University. Thank you so much, Iyad, for being here with us today. I'm just going to briefly read your biography, and then the floor will be yours to start with your lecture. Yes, the title of Iyad's lecture is, let me see, I have my notes. It's Ramallah's transformation from rural to urban center in the first half of the 20th century. Architecture, urbanism, and immigration. And Yiad Issa teaches in the Department of Architecture at Birzeit University. His work investigates the intersections between architecture, art, and urbanism within the city's landscape and modern history. His recent researches explore topics related to modern history, urbanism, and cities in Palestine and the region. His recent research in 2020 about Deir Ayub, destroyed village, I hope I pronounced it well, critically investigates the history of visual representation of Palestinian rural landscape through maps and aerial photography. His work documentary from 2014 in the 2nd edition of Calandia International Biennale Archive is an art-based research reflecting on the role of broadcasted audiovisual material in articulating individual identity and collective memory. His work At the Edge of Reality from 2012 in the 4th Cities exhibition Beyond the Celestial and Terrestrial is an art-based research reflecting on the contemporary dynamics of Jericho city. He also curated modernity and urban life in the Arab region symposium in Calandia International in 2012. And he has been involved with several rehabilitation and renovation initiatives locally and internationally. So again, it is really a pleasure to have you with us today. And the floor is yours whenever you want to start with the lecture. And thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you. I should have sent you a smaller, like a shorter bio, so to make your life easy than this one.
Oh no, it was a pleasure to read all these amazing achievements.
Okay. Thank you. My presentation today will be about the transformation of Ramallah city. What's interesting about the case of Ramallah, for those who don't know much about Ramallah, comparing to other Palestinian, let me do this. Okay. Comparing to other historic cities in Palestine, which is maybe dated back till the Roman time, Ramallah has a distinctive history. It used to be a village, and it's been transformed the last 2 centuries, or maybe the last 100 years, from to be a village to be a town and then to be a city, which is in contrast to cities, if you know about them, like Nablus, Jerusalem, Jaffa, Gaza, Akka, maybe Haifa. All those they've been kind of urban centers serving the surrounding rural areas since long time ago. Some of them goes back to the Roman times or even before. But Ramallah used to be a village, and this is what we have documents about it, and we will see how it's being transformed. So what's important for this presentation, it's what does it mean to be transformed from like small village to a city, which means to move from rural domain to urban domain, which is for me, it's an interesting case because it's not just only about architecture, it's about the transformation of the whole society. For those who don't know Ramallah as well, Ramallah it used to be a small village. It's 16 kilometers up north of Jerusalem. So it's in the central highlands and in a central location, which this is what gives Ramallah this kind of strategic location to be transformed into this. So if we look back, if you see this photo, this is one of the oldest photos that we have for Ramallah, and this photo represents a typical, it's a close-up of the village, so we see just only the built environment. So, because for me, the village is also the adjacent and the surrounding landscape and agricultural land around the built environment. But in this one, I will jump between programs, if you may allow me, because I want to dig deep in this photo to see what does it mean, to look inside. But this is like a general panorama. This is being taken, we don't know the exact date, but it's the beginning of the 19th century. So it's 20th century. So it's 1905 to 1920. We don't know exactly, but it looks like Ramallah before transformation. The only thing that we can see the whole rural fabric that we usually find it in the Palestinian villages. So if we look closely, let me see. I think it's here. Yes. Can I share my screen so you can see all the? Can you see this one?
Yes. We can see that well.
So it's a stereoscope photo. So if we look at one of those photos, if we look inside it a little bit, because it's high resolution, we can jump in. So if we look inside the structure, we can see the typical Palestinian village homes. We can see some of them has some of the houses or courtyards have the second floor. Most of them looks like the same. Yeah, it's the same simple structures that I will go and talk about it a little bit more. But one distinctive building that we will look at it again and we come back to it, it's the church. The church, this one is the it's the Eastern Church, the Roman Catholic one. Okay, sorry, the Roman Orthodox. So it's this one. So we can see, because this one is being built, we'll come to it in a bit. It's been built in the mid of the 19th century, like 1850, 1852. And it's being built outside. If we look at this photo, we can see it's at the edge of the historic center. But we look at it on maps and see how, because it's like the first building that was built outside the fabric. So I'll go back to the presentation and okay. Okay, I will go to this one as well. So what's important about Ramallah as well, it's located on the Roman road between Jerusalem and Nablus. So if you can see, this is Jerusalem, and this road that been highlighted by yellow, it goes up north to Nablus, and here is exactly the location of Ramallah. It's like 2 kilometers off the main road, but the adjacent village, which is Al-Bira, which is now part of the urban agglomeration of Ramallah and Al-Bira. So it's like a one city now. Only the engineers and the planners knows where is the exact borders between them. But so Okay. Okay. Again, if we look at the same, if another photo here, we can see in close-up is the fabric. It's the same kind of architecture. It's a vernacular architecture, rural architecture in Palestine. So if we try to have an abstract about the structure of the village, the village of Ramallah or any village or rural areas in Palestine, usually it's good to look at two dimensions. It's like the social dimension of the village and the economic dimension. So we can look at the village as an economic unit and as a social unit. Okay. So if we look at the built environment, sorry, it's in Arabic. It's usually you have the cluster, the built environment, and you have around it is the surrounding agricultural land. Adjacent to the built environment, usually you'll have the land, agricultural land for the immediate one is like for the crops and for the vegetables. And the further away you can find the olive groves or the orchards. In the case of Ramallah, it's olives as well. It's the economy built on olives and oil, but also we'll have from the oral history, that there was also agricultural activities surrounding the industry of doing dried figs. So we have figs as well and grapes as well. Okay, so and usually this one is a kind of abstract and exaggerated, but usually the built environment where the village, the buildings is there, it's just only around less than 100%, sorry, 1% of the whole landscape of the village. Okay, so now if we tried also to do a kind of abstraction for the built environment itself, the building, the fabric, the traditional fabric, the vernacular fabric, the rural fabric, we'll find it also, this one, it looks at the structure of the neighborhoods, okay, or the hara, what we call the harat. So back again, if we look at the village as a social unit, we know that it was built on kinship. So all people in the village are comprised of maybe 4 or 5, 6 extended family. Each one lives in one neighborhood. So if we look here, let me try to find the pen. So for instance, this one could be like a neighborhood. This one could be a neighborhood where the extended family lives, and what separates them is the small alleys and the small dirt roads. If we look a little bit further and we go again and analyze it a little bit more, let me stop. Okay. And put the actual building and the small, and look at the blocks inside each neighborhood, we'll find what we call the hosh, or the extended family, or where the part of the extended family lives and they share the same space. And this is all known well in the Middle East and Mediterranean region. But usually our perception about it, it comes from the cities like Naples. It's a closed courtyard. It's interesting to mention when we study the case of Ramallah, and most of this research was based on a research I've done within a team at Riwaq in maybe 2010, 2012, where we've done all this kind of analysis for the urban fabric by the available maps. If we look at this one, usually we know from the urban areas that we have this kind of very strict closed courtyards, or like hosh, where the extended or small family or the nuclear family lives in this complex, which is closed for the public, and it's been open for just only for the family. In the villages, it is there, but it's not as much as we knew about it, because we found that, yeah, there is a kind of separation between public and private, but because most of the people in the neighborhood, they are from the same family, yeah, they have a kind of demarcation for their ownership, for their space, but it's not strict as much as we find it in the urban cities, traditional cities like Nablus or Jerusalem, because, and we'll see if we look at the pictures, it's open for the landscape. Usually it's a cluster environment, cluster fabric. It's been built back to back, and this kind of structure that we talk, the neighborhood, house, and the small houses, but it's open for the landscape as well. It's not being built in a kind of inside a walled city like Jerusalem. It has a good connection and a direct connection with the landscape surrounded. So this is the typical photos from Ramallah, from the urban fabric. So we can see the old houses. We can see, let me find them. So this is like the family unit. Maybe this is like the whole house. This is the entrance and the gate. This is a small service room inside the house. Here is the open courtyard where we can look at other pictures where they can, like women, they can have a kind of daily activities like washing and cooking. So this is what I'm introducing, those kind of photos to have a kind of visual narrative for what does it look like to be in a traditional vernacular architecture or village in the late Ottoman time. So this has been taken as a photo. So it has to be after the mid of the 19th century. Okay. Okay. If we look at another photo, so this is kind of daily activities that could happen inside the house as well. Okay, and this is the immediate kind of landscape where you can find those kind of activities. So till this is the kind of activities that happen till the mid of 19th century. Okay, this is the kind of plans done in the research for a typical house, a typical unit. Okay. This is like a cross section of a typical also peasant house, where we know that it's a one house, so one room unit, where people live, cook, and sleep in the same room. Sometimes, if it's more complicated, you'll have two levels where the lower one can use as a storage and keep the animals, and the upper one is for living. And if it's more complicated, you'll have a place where you can also put the the storage for the crops. And sometimes you will have, if it's more complicated, you'll have a separation between the living space and the sleeping space. Okay. This is if it's more complicated. This is a kind of redrawing for the whole house, where you can find several rooms organized around the central open space. Okay. Okay. So what happened in Ramallah by the turn of the century? Many things that happened during the Ottoman reform time, like since mid 19th century, 1850 and on. One of them is that a lot of missionaries came to Palestine and started building churches, schools, and involved in the healthcare institutions and stuff like that. And because Ramallah used to be a Christian village at that time, so a lot of missionaries came to Ramallah and started having activities there. So, okay, so where they can have their activities, basically they can have it by renting rooms and stuff like that. And the more that they get established, the more they start to have a permanent structures. And where usually it has to be outside the historic center. Okay. It's worth mentioning that the first building that we knew from the records, but the one that till now we know it's the first building that was adjacent to the historic center. It's not like the missionaries and churches that came from outside Palestine. It is the Greek Orthodox Church, which is the local church, because before it was built, I told you about it. We look at it. It was built in the 1852. Okay, So it was built adjacent. I have to jump again to another, to a kind of zoom for this one. Let me find the zoom for, because at this aerial photo was taken in the First World War. It was taken in 1918 when the British troops came and entered Ramallah, and the German and the Turkish were doing a kind of reconnaissance activities, and they trying to take photos for Ramallah. So this photo, even it was taken in 1918, but we know from it what was the condition of the traditional fabric, and by then what was the building that started to be outside the building. So my theory was about it from the analysis that the public building and especially the missionaries and churches started to be erected outside the historic center. This opened the kind of way for the well-off families to build outside the fabric. Okay, and here is the first transformation that happened for Ramallah. But that doesn't mean that the same, and it happens in one night. It happens over like the second half of the 19th century and the beginning of 20th century. And also with the missionaries came also education. It takes a generation for the educated people from Ramallah to start working in Jerusalem, getting some money. So it was also about transforming the society. Then the built environment, the land for agriculture, becoming available, not vacant, but becoming available for development. And this is also, again, it didn't happen in one night. So you will have people building modern houses outside the fabric, urban houses, public institution. Also next to it, you will find, and we'll see it in the aerial photos, you'll find still agricultural activities happening in the adjacent plot or adjacent land. Okay, so I will jump over and see a detail for this one, because, okay, this one. This is the same photo, but because it's in high resolution, I really like to dig in deep inside it and try to do most of the analysis on this one. Okay, so again, this is the historic fabric of Ramallah. Okay, again, this is the church I told you about it. So let me try to find. Okay, and this is the monastery beside it. So okay, so we can tell that from the analysis and survey on the ground, this is kind of the fabric, the rural fabric. So by 1918, a lot of buildings and houses and public buildings are outside it, but it's nice that we can analyze on this one. So the church was built just adjacent to this one and was built on the immediate agricultural land here. And we know this is called the Sahel area, and it used to be one of the fertile land adjacent to the historic center. And then we can see, let me check. Okay. If we zoom out, we can see here is the Protestant church, which is one of the oldest one. This is the Latin church. So all of them, and this is also one of the missionaries that came to Ramallah early. It's also the Quakers from the US, and they built a huge complex of school here. So all of them kind of outside the historic center, and again along the main road that comes linked to the road from Jerusalem to Nablus. It's the Roman road. This road, it's been established since the Roman time, and this is the adjacent village of Al-Bira. We can see Al-Bira is here also. It has a lot, it has a couple of buildings going around and building outside the historic center. But in Ramallah, the case, we can see that it's more than that, and it's going along the way. And this is what is now is the new city center between Ramallah and Al-Bira, which is called Al-Manara. So this photo by the end of the Ottoman time. So we know that the modernization and this kind of modern buildings that we will see in a bit, also the machineries, it happened in the late Ottoman time. Okay, the late maybe century of the Ottoman rule. It doesn't happen when the British came, and it is being accelerated, yes. It's been intensified, yes, but we can tell from this photo by the beginning that it happened before the end, before the end of the First World War. Let me go back to the presentation. Okay. We could find some of an old photos, but they are in a really bad shape that we can. It's not easy. We try to renovate them or like do a conservation, but it's really hard to find them. But one by one, it's like finding the plot. So by 10 pictures, you start relating buildings to each other and know a little bit about it. What's nice about this one, here is the historic center. And here is the Quakers, here is the church. And here is the agricultural land I told you about. Here's the Quakers and here's the Latin church. So we can see that here's the cluster and here's the separate buildings that started. Most of them, they are kind of public buildings that start to build outside. What happened as well and here is the church that I told you about. What happened is not only going outside the historic center by just only the public building, the churches, and as well the houses of the well-off people as well. Ramallah, which is very important, it's more than one factor that happened, but this is one factor. But what happened as well in almost the 1900, the Ottomans gave Ramallah the status of a kind of center, a kind of sub-center of Jerusalem, where they put a kind of administrative offices in Ramallah to help as a kind of representation for the Ottoman government. And also, this serves Ramallah and the adjacent villages. So if you want to do a kind of any official documents, you come to the government office in Ramallah. This helped the commercial activities in Ramallah. So Ramallah till now, since at that time till now, it is a kind of local market for the adjacent villages and adjacent till now becoming like urban centers, but adjacent villages of Ramallah. So the commercial activity is becoming more and more serving Ramallah and adjacent. So we're becoming small craftsmen shops is becoming in Ramallah, and this moves on and on. It's like a kind of snowball. Now we can tell it happens also at the new area outside the rural fabric. But what's interesting, what we know, it happened at the adjacent edges of the historic center, okay? And inside it, and started to go inside it, trying to penetrate it. It's a kind of early gentrification, not gentrification, but early redevelopment of the historic center, even inside the historic center, building shops as well. So where could be the start point for this kind of commercial activities? It's the center of the historic town, so it is the church. So it started this kind of activities in front of the church, and we can look at it in a bit. But let me first go back to the missionaries. This is the Quaker school, the Friends Girls School. So this kind of, if we look at it now, we can see the different type of architecture that been introduced to the village of Ramallah, or at that time, maybe the town of Ramallah, okay? It is different, but it's still from the same region. Yani you'll find this kind of architecture is becoming like the kind of architecture that is being built in the public buildings of Jerusalem, or maybe Jaffa. But Ramallah architecture at that time, it's been really closed, in a closed tie with what happened in Jerusalem as well, okay? This is another photo for the school before, yeah. This is a classroom inside the school. So the need of different spaces as well, educational spaces. This is the Friends Meeting House. It's been built outside at the outskirts of Ramallah as well. So it's a different type of architecture. It's been introduced as well. This is the Latin Church. This is really, I guess, maybe 1913. So it's a different type of architecture as well. This is the plan of back to the commercial activities. So we look at that the commercial activities started to happen. Let me get the pen as well. So here is the old city. Here is the church that I told you about. So what our analysis for the commercial activities in terms of architecture and style and some dating for the building that we could identify, it started here in front of the church and it goes back to the new city center. And also there was a kind of magnitude to go also inside the fabric in this way. But yeah, it has a limitation to go inside the fabric, to demolish, build the new buildings. And even at the turn of the 20th century, it goes in this direction and in that direction. But we know till now it couldn't go further than maybe 1 kilometer. But in this way, the whole new development of the new city and linked to Elbiri as well, it happens in that direction. Here again, there is a map where you can see the old ruler fabric, and this is what happened by 1935 maybe. So we can see the whole development going to the new city center and also in the adjacent areas. Here is a photo really direct where I told you that the commercial activity started. This is in front of the church, the church. So we can see, yeah, for sure this photo is staged. We can see that because so when photographers and travelers used to come to Ramallah, they will go for the traditional market where it's still public and can easily take photos. So this is in front of the church, even on the top of the shops in front of the church, looking at the, I think most of the photos we've taken in like either social events like weddings or in days where there's a lot of people in the market. Sorry. Here is another photo for the same area, but from the opposite direction. I guess it's in a wedding event. The church is next is really it's out of the frame. It's to our right. So yeah, it's not. I call it like this is the kind of village plaza where the public activities used to take place. Yeah, it's not like the piazza in Italy or like the historic European cities, but this is the available space where public activities and vendors or used to take place. We can see some small shops to the left. We can start to see something interesting. Even the fabric is a traditional, but we can start to see the balconies, which is a very important transformation in the architectural and typology of buildings, where but not on the ground floor level, but maybe on the first floor level. Okay. Far right of this picture, we can see the Ottoman court. Maybe it used to be. We don't have records, but according to the oral history, this used to be the Ottoman court. So maybe the official activities used to happen in this building. This is the building. So even now we're not in the modern time and the European influence, but we can see that a different type of building and typology of public buildings came to Ramallah. If we look at the first ground floor, yeah, it is a kind of typical. If we try to analyze this one, for instance, if we take this part, it's a kind of typical village house. This is the entrance, the windows. So it's a kind of typical. If we take this one, it's the same. But the second floor definitely tell us that there is a new type of architecture is being introduced in this building. Okay, those kind of riwaf or gallery and the rooms inside. So it tells us a different story than what we saw in the first building, peasant building that I told you about. Here's another photo in the main road as well. We can still see the balcony I told you about. We can see all those either new structures that been built as commercial activities, or some courtyards. We know that some courtyards or some traditional houses being inverted, so they have an external door and make it for commercial activities. Okay. This is one of the, also again, according to the oral history, this is the old house, sorry, the first house that was built outside the historic center in 1902. It is a typical kind of central house where we can find the liwan and the rooms. If we look at the plan as well, here's the plan. Okay, this is the central hall. This is rooms to the right and to the left. But what's important again about this one is not just only the architecture, is looking at the social transformation. So what does it mean to live in a kind of this house outside the historic fabric? It means that for the first time, a nuclear family decided to live outside and live apart from the extended family. It's a well-designed building, and sometimes we still have it arguing. It's usually those kind of buildings in Ramallah built in 1920s and 1930s, and this one was built in 1902. We don't know much about the owner, but it is very important, and it tells us that this owner was well off and has a lot of money to build this kind of structure. So it tells us socially that he decided to live outside the court, the hosh, the structure of the extended family. So it's a kind of seeking for a kind of modern way of living, even if it was just only built to imitate the type of architecture, modern architecture in Jerusalem. What's important about this one as well, yeah, it's a kind of modern house that we see in the 20s and 40s, but what's important as well, that the services, the kitchen and the toilet is being kept outside the building. So it's here. And there's like a small open space here. So even we claim it's a kind of modern building, it's outside the courtyard, but still as a unit, it's still something between modern and the tradition, because he kept this, maybe a lot of activities happening like cleaning, washing dishes or washing clothes here. Toilets are here, but still didn't go inside the building. So it is a kind of transition area, transition kind of design as well. If we look at the one, this is the section, and it's also new technologies being introduced, like the I-beam. So it's not all of it, it's a crossbow. So the central hall, it's an I-beam. This is a traditional village farmer house being built next to that one, after that one by maybe 6 or 7 years, 1907. So again, to keep in mind, it's not like the whole transformation or the urbanization could happen by one day or one night. So even that guy tried to imitate, because that style kind of architecture it's a kind of influence by Jerusalem. And we know that this a kind of influence between Ramallah and Jerusalem. And basically most of the new development and new modern buildings, Ottoman or like the missionaries happened at that time in Jerusalem, but started to happen in Ramallah as well. But we can tell that a lot of part of the community started to go towards that trend, but at the same time, a lot of people still living the peasant's life, wants the peasant house. So they built, even at that same period, they built a kind of a traditional peasant house. This is Khalil Sakakina Center. It's a house built outside the historic center in 1927, I guess. So here again, we see also modern technology introduced, I-beams. Again, to look at those stuff and see what kind of development and transformation happened, we always come back to the unit of peasant house like this one to see what kind of difference usually we'll have between those. Here, if we look at the plan, it's more transformed. It's more than one floor, multi-floor. It has a veranda. It has even it has a kind of central house, but the whole organization is not asymmetric like that one. Rooms are on just on the right and left of the main hall. Also, the services, kitchenette and toilets are now inside. So the whole it's not just only on the style of architecture, but also we look at how the family and the social activities inside it's been transformed as well. From the first one, the small one, to this one as well. If we go back to the urbanization of Ramallah, we can see the panorama that's been taken later and the one that I told you about it in the late Ottoman. And we can see the whole transformation. I will go and do zoom in another program in a bit, but let's keep it in this way and come back again. Here is again. The transformation as well continued in the on the British mandate and been intensified as well, as I told you. This building is the first Ramallah municipality. We can tell that it's a mixed-use building, so you'll have the commercial shops downstairs, and basically, I think it used to be the vegetable market, and they built later the offices up there. So this is, I guess I forgot completely. I guess it's in the 20s. But what's interesting about it, Ramallah municipality established before that in the Ottoman time. But as all the villages now in Palestine, you started with a rented room or rented house, then you'll get the establishment to a degree that it has to have a permanent structure. So this is the first Ramallah municipality. It's also next and the adjacent of the historic center. So it wasn't an accident that they decided to have it there, not on the historic, on the new city center in Manara, because they knew that till now, most of the commercial activities and the center of power, it's related to the historic center. So even we're going in modernization, we're going in urbanization, but the new center, I won't say the new city center, but the new center of this town, let's say at that time, it's a transforming village to a town rather than a city, because city is being built on immigrants as well. Okay. Here is another type of houses that happened in the British mandate time as well. Again, it's been getting more complicated from inside, and the plan and the let's say the composition, it's not the simple box. This one I really like it, and it's very nice example, because this one, if you look at it, you'll see it's a Liwan house. Yeah, it has an influence of that comes from Jerusalem, the elevations becoming symmetric, all this kind of stuff. But if we look at what's underneath it, we look at the first stage of this building, we'll find this one. This is an elevation of that one. So basically what happened on this one, what happened on this one is, this is a typical rural house. And it was a common to if you're a family, you built two houses adjacent to each other and they are mirrored. So it's like the same house, and it was, when we analyzed the typology, it was a kind of a common typology to build this kind of two adjacent peasant houses. What they built, so this one was by 1898. And in 1911, this modern house was built, this floor. And this is the plan for the first floor, the new one, the modern one. So this one it tells us the transformation from a rural structure to a modern structure or urban structure on the same building, rather than discussing the whole urbanization of the whole fabric. Here it's simple, and it was direct and clear to see this kind of transformation between the ground floor, where families used to use it as a peasant house, then to move to the modern new houses that talks to the and very important point to tell. I forgot to tell. It's very important. When the machinery started to build, and this is from the oral history, the kind of structure that we've seen the schools. This one. Especially this one. Ramallah used to have a lot of good builders, but they used to use the traditional technology and built small houses. So for this kind of buildings, the missionaries brought people from other villages in Palestine that they are already familiar with this kind of architecture, which is especially from Beit Lahem area and Beit Jala. And those villages already had a contact with the missionaries, and they started traveling, also migrating to Latin America and the United States, and basically Latin America. So they told people from Ramallah about traveling to Latin America. So they are the one that they introduced Ramallah community to travel to the US. And that's what happened in the before even the First World War. So what we saw in terms of architecture, like those will of buildings, not the first one, not this one, but those ones. Sorry. Like those one, a lot of them, and we can see more complicated styles like this one, especially in the 20s, that was built in the 20s. That to get this kind of architecture, to build this kind of houses, you have to spend a lot of money. So where do you get the money? A lot of them, they migrated to the United States and Latin America. They sent the money back to their families, or they came back with the money and they established those kind of houses, those kind of. So at that time, what's interesting about it is that immigrating to the United States, it's not that they brought like colonial styles, or they brought American style or Latin American style architecture. No, they just brought the money and they imitated styles that happen in other urban areas in Palestine, like Jerusalem. And this is really happens a lot between the First World War and Second World War, especially in the 20s. So most of those nice individual building, separate building outside the historic center that built in Ramallah, it was built in the 20s. So when the First World War finished, and they can send the money back to their families, or at least they had a couple of years, or like 10 years of working on the States or Latin America to accumulate this kind of wealth to come back to build those houses. Those kind of commercial activities is being that we talked about it, pave the way to have a new city center, which is between the two villages, Ramallah and Al-Bir. And we can see this is an early photos for this kind of connection. Again, this is an aerial photography that maybe in the 30s that showed us also. If we look at this one and compare it to the one I showed you before, we can see it's not about just only a transformation about agriculture, land, it's also, and having a new building, it's the whole landscape is being transformed. Agricultural activities is going less, a lot of houses and urban activities build, individual building houses is going on the new, let's say a new urban center. I wouldn't say city center, okay? Sorry. So if we look at the first map of urban area of Ramallah, this is from 1930s as well, in the British Mandate, we can see the two villages centers are here and here, and we can see the new urban center happening here as well. And so part of the new development is also making a new maps, a new master plan, and it happened in the British Mandate time. We know that Ramallah started to have the first one in 1927 after the major earthquake. So there was a need because of all the development that happens outside. There was no modern master plan to organize it in terms of where to build, where to have the new roads, what kind of percentage building percentage comparing like ratio from the plot of land that you have. All this needed a master plan. So what we know that Ramallah started to have a kind of first master plan that like 27, and also because they wanted to see how we can organize it after the main earthquake. In Ramallah, there was no major demolishing or like collapsing, but there was a little bit in the historic center as well. This is a kind of photocopy for the first master plan that we find. We don't know if it's been ratified and it was in action or not, but we found a kind of copy from that one in 2000. This one done in the 40s, and we can see that there was a commercial activity zone between the old city center and the new city center. This is in 1944, so we can see what was the magnitude of building activities and construction activities outside the historic center. Also, by the late British Mandate era, there was a lot of commercial activities and tourism happening in Ramallah. So Ramallah is becoming started to be well known as a kind of summer resort for people from Jerusalem. First, then in the 50s and 70s, it's becoming for the whole region of Middle East. So we can see in this building another type of architecture. Modern architecture is the cinemas. So this building to the right is the Dunya Cinema, and it was being built by a local firm, investment company that was made of Ramallah businessmen. I guess it was 1944. I don't know when it was finished and started to work, but so this is before in Nakba. So even Ramallah started to have a modern buildings, public buildings, but for me, but not much people from outside Ramallah started to live in Ramallah. So it's still, in my humble judgment, it's a kind of town rather than a city, because it doesn't, there was not much attitude of immigrating to live in Ramallah, to start live and working there. It's still the same families, and yes, you'll have some people from the villages, maybe having a couple of shops, renting some flats, but it's not that. The most transformation that happened to Ramallah, it was in 1948 after Nakba, when a lot of Palestinians being expelled from their homes, villages, and cities on the coastal area, and especially in the Lid area, Lid and Ramle, Yafa. A lot of them migrated to Ramallah. It was influx. At that year, I guess the population of Ramallah has been doubled from 4,000 to 8,000, I guess. I'm not sure about the number. So here is becoming the big challenge for the city of Ramallah. You have a kind of infrastructure for tourism, infrastructure of local market for the adjacent villages. You have infrastructure of education. All are there in this town, but the most challenging thing when this influx of refugees came to Ramallah. So Ramallah was an interesting case because they contributed positively for the development of Ramallah, because people come, some of them came with the capital in terms of money and education, and they could establish within the city boundaries rather than being in refugees camp. Yes,
there is a lot of refugees live in the refugee camp around Ramallah, Jalazon, Amari, Al-Biri, Jalazon, also North Al-Biri, and in small pockets of refugees in Ramallah like Ain Musbah, Ain Minjid, Qaddura. But a lot of the refugees could, like by the support of local communities or like their church, or they already have a kind of capital to build on, they started to live inside the city. So the whole development, the whole transformation of this small town and small new city center has been transformed completely, and building is being intensified in this period. So if we look at this is like before, still before Nakba. This is before Nakba. Here is we're starting after Nakba under the Jordanian rule. Still the same landscape. It's like Ramallah continued in the direction of tourism, local market for the adjacent villages, but we can see that the architecture has been intensified, and there was a kind of also attitude for like more subtle, more functional architecture as well. We will have a look at some of the buildings, see what kind of architecture that could happen. Those kind of apartment buildings being built in the 50s, not just only to accommodate refugees, but there was a kind of demand. So either they rented or they built. There was a demand for this kind of start of this kind of apartment buildings. Also, this is Duar al-Si'a, so it's adjacent to it is part of the new city center, but not al-Manara. So we can see this kind of apartment buildings over the commercial shops. And basically, some of the buildings used to be offices, but a lot of them used to be housing apartments. Still, maybe, the whole transformation of transforming those from residential to commercial or offices, it just only happened in the last 20 years. So a lot of people was living on those kind of apartments in the new city center. This is another example for those kind of, and you'll find them if you look closely in the new city center. You'll find a lot of them still there. Okay. Again, the other half of refugees went and built another type of architecture in the refugee camp. This is Jalazon area, Jalazon refugee camp in Ramallah. This is how it looks like now. This is a photo, but it's an old resolution for how it used to look like maybe 70 or 80 years ago when they established the refugee camp. Okay. This is a kind of comparison between the what used to be the village square or the village space where public activities used to happen when it used to be a village, and this is when it started to be a town. Okay. Also, this is the map for the historic center, and the red ones are the building, that historic building that is still there, and the one that doesn't have the red one, it's the one where it was demolished. So part of the modernization was as well to demolish part of the historic center as well. Again, in the Jordanian time, also tourism that started, that we didn't talk much about, it started in the British Mandate era, it started to flourish. So it's becoming also not only for people from Jerusalem or people from around Ramallah, it's becoming for the whole region. So people from Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Jordan come to Ramallah as a kind of summer resort. Also, this means a new municipality building. So we can see that also, if you remember the old municipality building that we see now, we're talking about an pure administrative building, a new one. And what's interesting for me, that the municipality built I won't say park, it's the Muntaza. It's because it's a garden / restaurant as well, and it was in a kind of competition with the other restaurants on the same road. So they started with the commercial recreational activities. Then they moved to the administrative building. So it's very interesting for me that they built this one before the new municipality. So the municipality that we know now, it's this building. Then they did a new renovation and a new annex for this one maybe 20 years ago. Again, here's the same panorama that we've seen at the beginning for the agricultural land next to the historic center. And now we see the apartment buildings and the new kind of buildings. It's interesting because we have this panorama for the village and just only the village and the fields, the agricultural land. We can see it for the British Mandate Ramallah, where it has all the nice tiled roof buildings, and we can see it for the 50s, where it has as well those kind of new apartment buildings and new commercial area. This is the case of one of the restaurants. It's a whole story by itself, and the whole story of tourism in Ramallah can be discussed in a separate lecture on this grand hotel. But it started from a building, one of those buildings in the outskirts of the historic center, modern buildings, for a well-off family, I guess was a mayor of Ramallah, and he was one of the first to immigrate to the United States. Then he transformed the house to a hotel, and the hotel has been developed during the British Mandate time, Jordanian time, and stayed until the occupation of the Israelis and closed maybe in the 80s, and now it's been reopened again. So, so the whole tourism industry started with those kind of buildings that used to be houses then, and we can tell started to develop. Sorry, I will move a little bit further to this kind of special hotels. So the whole hotels that we see now, even the modern one built in the 70s or the one that we know that the Grand Park, it's been also introduced to the city during all this kind of development and transformation. So tourism was part of the transformation that happened in Ramallah. So commercial activities and tourism as well, and administrative buildings. So all those kind of architectural started with a local architectural examples or even rented houses, and started to be specialized a bit by bit. Also, houses has been transformed as well in the 50s and 60s to this kind of functional modern buildings. Then we'll have a nice period in Ramallah where this kind of modern architecture or architecture being influenced by international style and modernism, like this one and this one that being built in the 60s and 70s as well. And it's been all part of this kind of transformation from the rural to urban areas. And I guess basically that's it, but yeah. I'm not sure that you can see this one, but at the end of that research, we tried to make a kind of rapid assessment or rapid analysis where we can find all the threads between residential building from the 19th century, like from this rural village house to the new villas, also the commercial activities and buildings from this one in Souq al-Kundarjiyya to the huge building in the new city center, as well the mixed use and the apartments. So we can trace this one, the whole movement or the whole transformation from the village to the urban areas as well in in architecture and in urbanism as well. And basically, I will stop here. If anybody has a questions, maybe. Sorry for taking 6 minutes more.
So first of all, I would like to thank you very much, Iyad, for this super generous lecture. It's super rich, and it's a book actually. So yes. And I know by knowing a good part of the audience that you gave an immensely great amount of very useful hints for their own research purposes. So I would like, first of all, to open the floor to the audience if we have questions from attendees. So now perhaps I give a couple of minutes for everyone to kind of put some order in all these informations that you gave. So I would just try to take advantage of these few minutes just to really appreciate how you were able, through architectural objects and following the architectural language and so material science actually, to go back to the roots, to the, let's say, the human aspects of that stands behind all these architectures, and also the broader spatial development. So also you gave an incredible array, although Ramallah is compared with other mega cities in the world and other major migration centers in the world, Ramallah is still very, very small. And nevertheless, you gave an incredible array of how waves and typologies of displacement contributed to the development and transformation from a rural village, very provincial, let's say provincial in the sense that is its connection to the main centers is very indirect, to nowadays a city, actually, a metropolitan agglomerate that still attracts also still now other waves of displacement. And what I would like also to underscore, because I think that someone in the audience is working on PhDs on displacement in very different parts of the world, like in Southeast Asia, for example, that displacement, in your case, you were really able to materialize how displacement is not just refugeehood, but it is, you said, missionaries, so like religious communities coming with a purpose, and also even tourism is a form of displacement, although it is very temporary. And it is a voluntary one, but it's the will of someone to travel and see another place. So of course, this reflects spatially in new typologies of building, as you have shown with the hotels. That is something rather new. Also, the idea of tourism is something that belongs very much to modernity, as it was even now in traditional peasant communities. You do not have the habit of taking 15 days off or 1 month off and travel and go for a holiday or ride a, I don't know, a Ryanair airplane and go somewhere. I wonder if meanwhile someone has taken the courage to ask some questions. Meanwhile, I think it was a little bit overwhelming in a good sense. I really have the feeling. So I wanted to ask you a question, actually. If I'm not wrong, I hope I remember correctly, in your book, where you explore very much in detail what you presented today, you mentioned also, I think, that there was a particular aspect, especially for those traveling to the US and then building back home, that women who stayed at home had like a particular role in building, in realizing those architecture. Is it correct? And could you tell us something more, if so?
I can't hear you.
Okay. Could you?
Okay. I'm not the expert on that part, so I don't have the. That means I haven't seen the resources, but it's been well known that, yeah, in some cases when people when men from Ramallah migrated to United States or Latin America, and they stayed there, and they've been just only sending money rather than coming back with the money. So they just send the money and to build a new house, for instance. Yeah, at that time, in a lot of cases, women played a major role of organizing this kind of process. It's been well known, but honestly, I cannot go further about this one because I haven't. I heard it from other architects that they've been sitting with the families and they listen to the oral history stories. But for me, I've heard it from somebody rather than I face one or two cases that I knew that this family, that the house is being or construction is being supervised by the or the management, the project management. Let's say it's being done by the wife, for instance. But it's been well known, yes.
Well, I think it is something that is very little debate in general in history of architecture, especially on contemporary and modern architecture, of the role of women when you have displaced families. Or even I was reflecting at a certain point when you were mentioning the refugee camps, that still now in some refugee camps you have many families where the man unfortunately either passed away because they were killed by the Israeli forces, or they are prisoners. So the head of the family in many camps are women, and they also supervise all technical and architectural aspects. But I also have another question, if meanwhile someone else is thinking about questions. That was, do you think there is any particular reason for families, like for those who migrated to the US, that decided not to build like the things that they saw in their migration, but they preferred Jerusalem as a paradigm? Is it a way? Sorry?
You mean why they built in this kind of style, or this kind of?
Yeah. So, for example, you mentioned that those traveling and living in the Americas, instead of building like kind of a tropical colonial or Northern American houses, they went for models that they could find in Jerusalem.
Yeah, basically it's more than one thing, because this used to be, first of all, maybe this used to be the trend for this. Till that time, Ramallah, as you mentioned, Ramallah used to be in the outskirts of Jerusalem. So it's like the model. Like if we now have this kind of a critique about what's happening in Ramallah, we said that the role model maybe be the urban development in Amman or Dubai. At that time, it used to be Jerusalem as well, but on an architectural scale. So that's the case. So also at that time, it needs more than the local builder. So you need an architect or a master builder who's good. So you know that where the architects are being positioned are in Jerusalem. So this is one, and a lot of, and you know, if you're talking about the emerging middle class in Ramallah, you're talking about educated young generation that already working in Jerusalem as well. I didn't mention that much. So you're talking about white collar clerks in the governmental institution in Jerusalem, especially in the British Mandate time. So they are good close connections with Jerusalem. So for this, you are at the outskirts of the main city, the capital is Jerusalem. You want to develop a new style, you want to build a new house, so your role model is the capital itself. And you get the architect from there as well. And also the time that some of the houses that been built, I mentioned in the 20s, maybe the guy or the man who went to the United States just only spent a couple of years there, or maybe 10 years. So it's not that enough time to absorb the culture and reflect on the architecture of the US, and decided it's not easy to adapt this kind of architecture. You need time to reflect and absorb and have a connection with to kind of carry, let's say, to carry this style and get it back home. And So basically, this is my interpretation. Yani, it still needs a challenge as well.
I think this is really also the one of the course of the series of lectures and the workshop that goes alongside with, to experiment, like to try to think about architecture beyond the material aspects. But as you said, like there are so many entangled relationship, like the client and the architect and the technology, and then you had the government, and you have economy, and you have also fashions and tastes that change. So I think it's like your presentation, I think in so far was like, I would recommend it also to many of the students that that I met before, also in Belgium, that are working on completely different issues, because in terms of like the entanglement between society and physical and spatial forms is really super intense.
Yes.
That was amazing.
Because it's also because Ramallah has been lucky with this kind of research, because not just only the research that we did as a part of the team of Riwaq, as well Khaldun and Nazmi did the first book, and many of the building that I mentioned, because our research is being specialized as well in the historic center. But their book was about the building outside the historic center, have a marvelous work. And many of the buildings that I already showed, it's been from the other book. So it's a kind of tradition of researching the architecture of Ramallah, maybe the last 20 years. So it's a whole research process, not just only me. And back to the issue of women, the hotel that I mentioned, the Grand Hotel, it's been managed for a long time by a very well-known, strong woman, Aida Hode, and her mom as well. So the whole industry, and this is one of the early hotels, and much of the influence of tourism in Ramallah goes back to this family and what they did and introduced to Ramallah in terms of tourism. And for a long time, most of the time, Aida and her mom were the real managers for this place, maybe 50, 60 years. So if we're not talking about just only construction of building, the whole tourism industry in Ramallah, it was being really managed for a long time by those women as well.
This reminds me of something that is common to the Mediterranean in general, that many hospitality structures in the Mediterranean often were started and maintained by women, perhaps because they have a sense of domesticity. So like the secret of a successful tourism facility is that it makes you feel home and comfortable, but also because like and this is a feature that I very much see, especially in the Bilad al-Sham, that women often have a sense of business that is very particular. So that's another aspect that was fascinating. If someone, do you guys, audience, have something to ask, or shall I ask one last question myself? You are kind of shy, or you are also fasting, all of you, for the first day, which is tiring.
Yeah.
So if there is no other question, I will just ask one last curiosity. Sorry, but it really like your presentation opened so many drawers in my head that I can't resist. I will jump on it. So when you showed at a certain point the French school, so a very particular and peculiar building that doesn't have much in common, I would say, with the vernacular architecture that you have shown that was particular of Ramallah until then. So I confess being ignorant of the fact whether this building, and I ask, I don't know if you know that, if this building was built by the religious order that managed the school, or if it was built or sponsored by the Ottoman Empire. I ask this just because recently I was going through some literature about the Tanzimat, so the reforms that you mentioned in your presentation, and a part of the Tanzimat was the establishment of state-sponsored and state-led facilities. The municipalities were one of those. So it was not only the institution, but also the building, and schools were one of those facilities that were introduced by the Tanzimat, and that became kind of like the modern idea of school. You have a building where you have the teachers and you need a special typology. So I was wondering if the French school, where it comes from.
I don't have a direct answer for this question, but as far as I assume, not know, is being built by the missionary themselves. And because part of the oral history as well, it's not the document I've seen. It's always about they bought the land, and we know that because the other school, that there's another one that I showed you on there's another one at the outskirts of Ramallah, and actually it's in El Bir area. There was always this kind of oral history jokes about how much that they pay for that part. So as far as I know, it's been managed and completely done by the Quakers themselves, rather than. But this part of the history of institutions and architecture in Ramallah is still not been. There is much less not been discovered as well. We need somebody to dig inside the archives and see exactly the process, the architects. What we know so far is just only the oral history about the builders from Bethlehem area, that they introduced people from Ramallah to the United States and Latin America migration. This is an oral history from, and this is what Khaldun and Nazmi heard in the 90s, late 90s. When I did the research, people from that age already died. So if they didn't do the research, nobody heard even about that one. So still a lot of what we know, it's just only part of the history. It needs to be dig in the institutional archive and in the Ottoman archive to see more about this general assumptions that we usually use to verify them.
Thanks. You really highlighted with your lecture that really also, like, there are so many hints from the architecture when we take an attentive look at it that invite researchers to work on certain topics that are still undiscovered. That's absolutely great, and it's inspiring for scholars that are trying to find an interesting and relevant topic, and I think this is definitely one. So like the production of modernity indigenous from the Levant is one of this, and it seems like the general assumption that Westerns brought modernity is actually a fabrication most of the time. So Iyad, I want to thank you, and I would like to thank all our guests that stayed with us, and they are really interested because like they kept on with us half an hour more than expected in the schedule, because it was really super interesting. I would like very much to thank you all, and